The second major vision in Lecture 7 of Jung's Vision Seminars is a complicated one. It starts with the following images. A white bird flies down from the sky and lands on the native's head. The native man grabs the bird and stomps on it with his heel. Night then falls and the clouds part, and the face of God appears. God says, "You must wander until you find again the white bird that you have killed." The interpretation begins by recalling that the native man was first animated by the powers of the ram, which he killed. Now that same energy, what Jung calls libidinal energy or psychological energy, which he is careful to suggest is a concept or a hypothesis and not a fact of science, this energy appears as a white bird, which the native again tries to assimilate in the same manner he tried to assimilate the ram, by killing it and crushing it under his foot. The white bird, as Jung has suggested throughout the seminars, represents spirit and thought. The bird, representing spirit, is in opposition to the native, the male personification of the patient's unconscious. But of course, the natural Christian interpretation is that the bird represents the Holy Ghost, which is at odds with the naturalistic unconscious. Stamping out the light of the Holy Ghost, night falls, and the spiritual element is removed. Then the appearance of the face of God, Jung continues, is a consequence of the sin committed against the Holy Ghost, cursing the native man, or the naturalistic unconscious. God appears in response to the presence of evil, that is, the things of the unconscious, the underworld, the pagan or primitive things represented by the native. These things are all represented by the native man, who resents the white bird or the intrusion from above. Next in the vision, two natives, now one from the east, walk around the black pond many times. Jung makes an extended comment at this point on the reason why one of these figures is now from the Asian East, suggesting that the patient has studied Chinese philosophy in detail. The personification of her unconscious, according to these Eastern philosophical opinions, he says, is indicative of the way the unconscious appears always clothed in the opinions of consciousness, which serve to entice consciousness into the underworld. So these two figures walk around the pond almost as if, Jung says, worshipping it according to the ancient rites of circumambulatio, a rite of fertilization, waiting for the pond to give birth to the white bird that God has asked for through their contemplation of it. Next in the vision, the white swan does appear, as if this magic rite of contemplation of the two figures have produced a thought. The bird now is not a bird of air, but a bird of water. One of the native men, concentrating on the bird, allows it through the transfer of his energy to talk. This is in fact a representation of one of Jung's healing techniques. By concentrating on the image of thought, the thinker gives it life, and the image speaks a message from the unconscious. It makes unconscious feelings conscious and available to the thinker. So through this concentration by the native man, the swan speaks the language of the Holy Ghost, saying, "Lo, I have come to you." The Holy Ghost, often conceived of as descending from above as the white bird at the beginning of the vision, has now instead risen from the water and from the earth. So Lecture 8 will continue on with an extension of this vision, but just to tie a few loose elements together, I think it's worth considering what the vision means for Jung's theology. And I say theology on purpose because Jung does, in moments of excitement, often tie his apparently naturalistic theory to symbols of traditional Christianity, as he's done in this vision. So Jung's psychology is, I think, a reaction against the calcification of Christian symbols in the church, which, much like the patient, have become overly intellectualized and cut off from natural life. His intention, which he is demonstrating with this patient, is to reconnect the symbols of Christianity to their natural origin, that is, to spontaneous feeling, which can be then made concrete by the intellect, which we talked about last time. It is, to put it differently, an attempt to establish for the patient their own personal mythology, under the premise that if Christianity is true, in whatever sense we might mean true, then the natural movement of the unconscious feeling will tend to corroborate its now overly intellectualized symbols. In at least one light, we might say that Jung is trying to save Christianity by proving its relevance in the unadulterated contents of the human unconscious.